Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile video for 3.25. And before we dive into this video, I just noticed that we are closing in on 100,000 subscribers on this channel. And I very much appreciate each and every one of you guys supporting the channel by just leaving a like or subscribing for more content. So if you do find yourself enjoying this video, I appreciate that a lot. That 100K means that I get this little play button sent. Absolutely crazy. Been doing this for a long time now, so thanks so much again. Anyways, this video, I'm going to talk about my league starter. So the changes, we made a couple of videos, and they've changed quite a lot of things. Some of those things are including the approach of defenses being more and more in line with not pushing us to do Divine Blessing with Eldritch Battery. You know, builds that uses Martial League can still do that. And I'm personally very tired of the whole poison meta. Now, I know my good friend Helmbreaker is going to do a poison version of this build, and yes, indeed, it is the Zoomancer. I decided to go for a CI, and one of the biggest issues with going CI with a build like this is the transition to get to the CI. So we made sure that the build is going to be in a position where the low budget can take you from league starting in a comfortable state, using things like a Bitter Dream. I'll show you PoB in a bit here. And then also be in a position where you can transition very easily into a medium budget state. And yes, we're going to go back to our classical minion helmet that I'm honestly quite in love with. Then, from this transition of medium budget, we're going to leap into a CI approach, which is something that is very nostalgic for me because that was usually that was used so often in the past with meta high-end minion builds. Ever since Previ came up with the whole large cluster push where we skipped the notables and went for 12 passives with effect scaling. So I'm very excited to actually go back to our old roots of this, which we used to do back in Delirium League many years ago. So without wasting your time, let's dive into the PoB. I'm going to show you what we're up against. We're going to start with the low-budget PoB. I'm going to run through them a little quick here. Do keep in mind that the PoB has been updated, but it's still lacking some fundamental pieces, such as the new base items, which mostly affects the approach of the higher budgets. But I'm going to tackle the generic parts of this, and obviously there will be a link in the description down below to the full written guide, which will be updated and ready to be used before the league launches. And also a quick note in that when you're following some of my build guides, there's actually a link to a Discord server for Meixsell called the PoE Vault Discord. So for example, if you go into the Zoomancer build, which is in the guide hub link, you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a link here that invites you to this Discord server. And that Discord server, it looks like this. In this server, you have the general chat, of course, and Meixsell is hosting this server where we have every single ARPG game that they have guides for in the ARPG industry. For example, we have PoE here, we got some Diablo 4, and we got some Last Epoch as well. And what you want to do is that if you end up having issues with any of the guides, you can always ask for any help and get help from them from either myself, my team, or the Meixsell team every day of the year. All you have to do is click on the guide help channel, create a new post, tag the guide creator, and we'll have a thread here that we can go through and help you out. Obviously, you can always swing by the stream and I'll answer any questions there. But for more in-depth questions, I might have to go through your actual character. That server is how we do this every day of the year. So that's enough of the guide. Let's track into the PoB. Essentially, as you might see, we're only sitting on 15,000 armor. There was a nerf to determination, and this is obviously detrimental in terms of defensive layers, and we're going to compensate this with a higher budget by pushing into clusters. Now, I'm going to try to avoid using clusters the best I can for low budget, and the idea with this build is so that you can play it in a low budget state, get through the entire campaign, run the white, yellow, red tier maps, get your void stones. First off, you might mention is the low EHP. This is caused by the glancing blows. I'll tackle this. It's just not really an accurate number you can go by. Even if you put up an Aegis, Aurora, and stuff like that, this can tell you that you're immortal because this actually only calculates average hits. What is important, however, is the max hit damage taken. This build in a low budget is not very good at physical damage taken hits at this budget. And the budget we're talking about is a generic +1 weapon, a shield with +1, and there's a helmet with +2. You can use the +1 early because it's already doing so much damage. And we can have the implicit. You don't need the mana reservation implicit until later. This is the cheapest, lowest tier implicit currency, by the way. All you have to do to adjust the mana reservation is essentially to be in a position where you skip the skitter bots at that time before you get enough mana to sustain it. So basically the tree obviously covers how you're going to level it. There's some leveling trees that goes through that you can follow the entire section in the bottom left corner here. This is also available in the written guide. But enough of the details. You guys will cover all the details in the written guide. So generically speaking, you want to make sure that you pick up any nodes that gives us extra zombies and extra skeletons. This is a Zoomancer. We're going to have over 30 minions on the screen. We make sure we have mana reservation. And what's really important in the early stage is actually having access to convocation cooldown recovery, both for offensive and defensive purposes as you're clearing. And you also want to make sure that your minions have plus 8% max resistances. Very, very important. We are going to be running Bone Barrier. This allows us to have minions leeching to us. This is why we're going to take a Leech Mastery. These 3 nodes don't actually do anything, but the Leech Mastery makes 10% of the leech they do become instant life to us. We're also going to be going in here for minion recover life on death, which is also going to help us a lot with sustain for an extra golem. Outside of that, the build is very generic. We're going to be going for the left-hand side for these nodes. As you can see here in the early stage progression, we are going to run in here to pick up these nodes from the left side. So that's the first initial process. And the leveling we are picking up Enduring Bond, which you don't really need later. And then basically the plan is sacrifice, spiritual command, get the masteries later. Accuracy will be needed in this build. And then pick up the R reservation. And then we're going to go to the nitty-gritty parts. I think that block focus is something you're going to take at the later stage of this build. And the first focus is just picking up the life, the resistance in life, as well as the minion-related nodes, especially this cluster, and R reservation. And obviously, Great Pact helps with accuracy a lot. The next step is actually going for the block nodes. And then we're going to be using Glancing Blows. Now, Glancing Blows is often, according to PoB, lowering our EHP. But what it does is similar to what the Guardian Ascendancy would do, which we're no longer going to run with this, allows us to be in a position where we're going to cap our block chance, or almost cap it, 72-72, which allows us to no longer need to run Bone Offering through Mysteries of Sacrifice and still achieve that high block chance. And the reason for this is that we want to mitigate as much damage as possible without forcing us to go too heavy into block. But Glancing Blows will make us take a portion of those damage anyway, 65%. This is covered by having the minions doing instantaneous leech to us on top of us having some life regeneration, 475 life per second, plus the leech from our minions, which is happening consistently, makes this a very comfortable way to play. And that allows us to run Flesh Offering for better DPS output. Again, this build has crazy high damage for a low budget. You can adjust this very easily. I'm very confident that in the build guide, I will be making sure that the helmet, for example, already will only have a +1 instead of +2 because they can be a bit expensive early on. And now we're down to 4.9. It's still way more damage than you need. So that's basically how this is played. And the defensive layers is going to be a bit higher than you see here in PoB, like I mentioned earlier. A lot of that is credited to the way we're going to sustain our build. And also because Jinx Juju gives us 10% of damage taken from our Spectres before our life. And this is something that is not calculated in PoB either. Something to keep in mind is that you're going to prioritize having your life on every single item that you can. And besides the HP, you want to make sure your elemental resistances are capped. And if there's any suffix slots open, try to get Chaos Res. It's very, very effective. We'll also be using it, the Chaos Resistance Flask to help with this. So a quick rundown on the gear. We're going to be running a +1 with, if you can, with minion damage. But +1 is very important. It's just survivability, damage, and accuracy for our minions. The shield +1 is very important, but make sure the rest and life is there. So prioritize that before the +1 so that your defenses is covered. The helmet, again, life and +1. And if there's a prefix open, you can then benchcraft the plus skeletons, which you come from unveiling items from the betrayal encounters. And the body armor, basically just try to get some dexterity if you can, because we're kind of a little bit limited on attributes for the end game. But mostly it's just life and resistances. Tri-grip is the bread and butter because we're going to convert all our damage to cold. You'll need 4 green sockets for this. Details of how to do this is in the written guide. Bones of Valor is absolutely dog shit. It is terrible with how bad this pair of boots are, but they are extremely cheap and very easy to come by. A rare pair of boots will obviously be a better choice later down the road, and the guide will also cover how you can progress in the gear. I'm going to show you the written guide in a bit as well. Jinx Juju is one of the later stage upgrades, helps you with survivability a lot, gives some chaos res and some attributes. This build is very socket starved, so we will be running double unset rings. The Animate Guardian, there's a full in-depth guide in this for Animate Guardian, which we will be using. However, you don't have to use it in the low budget, and you can enable it in the medium budgets. Not to be recommended, but because we're doing so much damage, you can skip it in the low budget. It's not going to be a big impact. What I did was having one ring with attributes, and the other ring was covering resistances, and that ring I had +2 level of socketed gems, allowing us to be in a position to have the Animate Guardian in there. Classical, very low roll, Darkness Enthroned. You can use Stygian Vice before that or any other belt to help with rest and life. And then we're going to have jewels, which point is we have a couple of options here. Credit to Helmbreaker for this PoB setup with these. So the option is make sure you have life at every single jewel. The other option is that you want to help with resistances if needed. and or attributes. And then the other option or the other priority will be to have either physical damage, which is the best out of the flat ones because of hatred. And then the other option is just flat cold damage. And if you want to have the cheaper jewels, cobalt jewels is actually cheaper. And instead of flat damage from the ghastly eye jewels, you can have these, which does not fit in the Darkness Enthroned, that gives you a % life and % minion damage. And then we obviously want to have one jewel that gives you taunt on hit. Now, blind is preferable, but the priority will be to get taunt. Sometimes they can be expensive, mostly not. So give it a day or two if they're getting expensive, but try to get one with taunt. And if you're having issues, since the build's doing so much damage, get a life, get a taunt, and if there's damage on it, great. But get one with taunt, even if you lose the damage in the early stage. Bandit-wise, we will be killing all. Brian King, Pantheon God, Soul of Aberrath for the small one. The PoB has taunt here for the less damage taken. Enemy Guardian is currently wearing additional curse, as well as the Leercast and Dying Breath. And if you check the item section, you can actually click on this item set and choose the Enemy Guardian to see that he's wearing very cheap, stupidly simple gear. A corrupted pair of gloves for elemental weakness will work if you have Windscream. If you don't have access to this, just skip it. Just use normal rare items to give him some life and you're done. It's perfectly fine. It still gives you 68% minion damage. I believe that covers all the details except for the Ascendancy and the skill. So I did mention the Ascendancy node not going Mistress, since we're going to go Plaguebringer to allow us to generate corpses for the better AoE, but mostly it's for the damage and damage reduction on enemies. Very, very good for this build. And then we're going to run Mindless Aggression for life and damage, as well as Bone Barrier, like I mentioned before, for that leech. Do not take this part of the tree unless you have access to this one. And because of the way the build is played, you can choose to either go Commander Darkness first or rush Bone Barrier. Commander Darkness is a very simple choice because it gives you all resistance, helps you in the early stage, so I would recommend this as your first Ascendancy. Skill-wise, this is where it gets very tricky. There's a lot of stuff in here. Before I talk about this, I do want to point out that Spectres from Affliction League is coming back. We don't know how strong yet. I'm waiting for a response from GGG about this. So for now, we're going to have the guide updated with the information that we do have, and there might be some changes to this, which you'll see in the written guide before the league launches once we have that info. First off, we're going to run a body armor with Raised Zombie. There's two choices here. As you might see, we're not really caring about having melee splash, but you could run a melee splash instead of multi-strike to increase your clear speed efficiency in the early stage. Later on, the AG takes care of this in the higher budgets. We're going to run elemental damage to attacks. Don't use this unless you have that Triad Grip glove. Melee physical, minion damage, and then elemental army, so that we can have the exposure, again, only if you have the Triad Grip, which shouldn't be very expensive to buy. However, if you want to scale maximum damage output versus bosses, as you can see here, 4.9 million, you can actually switch the elemental army and go in with skeletons, and now you do it 8 million DPS instead, which is absolutely insane. Let me verify the skeleton count here. Some skeletons, 10, sorry, one less. So that means 7.8 million, and then you get a Vol Summon Skeleton doing 9. Like, it's just ridiculous amounts of damage. But this is just a Zerg thing, not very comfortable to play when you're clearing in general. So normally I just skip skeletons in the low budgets. But do keep one to be leveled in your off slot or something. Then we have a Spectre setup, and this is where things get very tricky. So essentially, we're going to run a Spectre setup 4-link with Summon Phantasm, as well as Culling Strike and Bone Chill. And in here, we can actually verify this very simply, that right now we have a lot of Spectres in here. I'll talk about this in a bit. So what we're going to run is we're going to have 2 Crush Claw Spectres, which are going to be these Spectres here, Crush Claws. Then we have a 3-link with a Stone Golem and a Carrion Golem. If you want more physical damage mitigation, you can lower the damage and go for a Chaos Golem instead to help mitigate some of that fist damage hits, which I think might be preferable instead of a Carrion Golem and running this approach. And then we have the Animate Guardian in that ring, like I mentioned before. You can skip this, if you don't run that, you don't need an unset ring. We'll help you out with gearing. The Tri-Grip will be 4 green. We're going to have a Vol Haste. Do not activate Haste. We don't have mana for it. It's only there for the Vol Haste. You can literally choose to have this or not. It doesn't matter. And then we have a Dash linked with Second Wind, so you need 2 of the sockets to be linked. And the other one here is just a level 1 Desecrate. Curse, we're going to run a simple Frostbite. This is basically the spell we're going to actually be casting. And as you mentioned before on the weapon, it's a trigger craft, so we get there. Shield Charge will be our mobility choice. And then we have Convocation, so we can teleport our minions on top of us. And obviously, what you can do here is Dash is used to get over edges. Shield Charge doesn't do that. And then we have the trigger craft, and that is the flesh offering needs to be in the weapon. It is the only skill that we want to trigger with the weapon, which means that to avoid having other things be triggered, we're going to put some auras in our weapon. And those auras will be determination and skitterbots. Like I mentioned before, skitterbots will only be enabled and when you have the reservation efficiency from the helmet. If you not skip the skitterbots, you'll be fine with the damage loss. It's not going to be that significant for that type of content you'll be at. Hatred will be linked with generosity. This is still big, even though it's slightly nerfed. And then we have a configuration setup. And this is where this build gets very tricky, and most mini builds are very tricky. This one is disabled, right? So elemental weakness here is if you have elemental weakness glove on your enemy guardian. This is only here if you have it to increase the damage. So if you disable this, your damage is going to go down. So that's only if you have the AG in proper gearing. This is the Spectre setup for Arena Master, and this is the Spectre setup for a Carnage Chieftain. And here's the Phantasms. But let me start with the Spectres. So the reason this is set up this way is so PoB doesn't actually calculate the benefits of these Spectres unless you have them checked in this box here. So the first one is 2 Primal Crush Claws, which is why this is set to include in full DPS and a count of 2, but you are able to have 4 Spectres. So this one over here is then set to a Carnage Chieftain, which is going to give you a Frenzy Charges every 4 seconds. And the last one is an Arena Master down here, which is going to be using its Arena Master's Presence. This allows us to get more damage output, and this is how that is set up. Now, the Phantasm is a little tricky because the Phantasms is essentially needed to be set in this way to actually have the DPS be considered, and they are equivalent to a Summon Skeleton at level 17 in terms of damage output, which makes this really tricky to get the accurate damage out of it. So this is if you have all of them summoned, which is actually coming from the Spectre setup itself, from the Crush Claws, and they are only there to apply Bone Chill and Culling Strike in the end. So this is how this setup is configured. So these setups here is only to get accurate numbers of DPS output. So that is how the low budget build works. It might sound a little bit scary. Most of this is just technical things that's in the configurations of the PoBs, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Everything will be covered in detail in the actual guide. And speaking of the guide, I want to do again show you how this build is structured. Now, the ones on this in this video will show you the old version of it. And I want to point out that the first page here just basically shows you a video of it. It shows the introduction, the baseline approach. There's all the PoBs you'll ever need. Basically a TLDR of the build. What's important here is to point out these pages here. We have a Zoomancer changelog. We have a Guardian variant, which will be taken away now. There's the other pages, such as the PoB Pass, the Skill Tree, and Gems, which goes through this entire topic, or topics, in detail for anyone who wants to learn more about these and go through them in detail. There's also a page for gear, jewels, and flasks, which covers every slot in detail if you want to learn more of how to navigate, how to purchase them, and what to look for. And all of the details here will be covered in these guides. We have Ascendancy Bandits, we have Enemy Guardian, and Gear Progression. So these are the 2 pages I want to give a little bit of time in this video. So in the Enemy Guardian Spectre video, there's a video covering how to easily get your Spectres, how to summon them, how the mechanic works. It's all in detail, which Spectres you're supposed to be using, and also an Enemy Guardian in-depth guide, both mechanically, some gear suggestions of what you can do with him and what you shouldn't be doing and what you need to think about. It's all covered in detail here. And then the most important part of my guides is the Gear Progression page. This is the page you want to check when you want to learn how you start playing the build throughout the campaign, all the way into low budget, and how you transition your gear progression priority, moving in on the early game stage gearing into jewels and shields and everything and the rest. And then going from there, there's a conclusion of that budget and how you're going to take the next steps of upgrading the build into the medium budget stage. All of these things will be updated on every single one of my build guides. And it's just everything you'll need, as well as the active daily support help on the Discord server and my stream. So I hope you guys will enjoy that. I'm going to quickly summarize the medium and high budget version a little bit here. Most people that are going to check this probably already done with this video. So for those of you still watching, hope you guys are getting used to my voice. I'll try to keep up the pace. Medium budget versions where things get a bit interesting. This is where we're going to start using cluster jewels. We're having the same ascendancies, same thing with the bandits, with the gods, but we are going to change into a bandit of helping a Lyra. This is to alleviate pressure on resistances. Now, if you have proper rest on your gear, you don't actually need this and get an extra skill point from doing so. But this will help you with resistances if you need so. There will be a description of how to do this in the actual guide, of course. Gear-wise, we are obviously moving away from the bonus of Ullr and going for rare pair of boots with brittle implicit. We have a chest piece with implicits as well. And now we're going to be pushing up a lot more focus on getting armor. So what we're looking for is armor bases. It's very likely that I'm not going to run a bone helmet to help with defensive layers, especially in the high budget where we go for an ES base, because 20% increase in damage is kind of irrelevant at this point. And the most important part with this version is that we are ramping up our armor quite significantly. We're still using glancing blows, and the ascendancies are the same, but we're now focusing on crits. So the skills, I'm not going to go through them all, but we are going to use a precision, and that helps with the crits, and we're going to use Spirit Offering. And any leftover mana to not screw over your mana cost of the actual frostbite and your trigger, we'll use a lower level vitality to help a little bit with the life regen on top of the leech. However, we do not have instant leech in this version, so be mindful of that approach when using glancing blows. Important part with this is where we're going to start using endurance charges. So the first cluster is a generic 8. You can have higher passives. Obviously, 8 would be better with only 2 different notables. If you don't get these notables, it's okay. The purpose of this is to get more damage out of the build and allow us access to a medium cluster and 2 smaller ones. One of the small is a mana reservation one. If you find a 2 or a 3 passive one, that's okay. You can alteration craft this very cheaply to get yourself the Spiteful Presence to lower the reservation of hatred. And then the medium cluster, the most important part is actually Blessed Rebirth. This is to help you keep your skeletons alive versus AoE damage just after they've been summoned for the next 4 seconds. And if you get life from death when the skeletons get oversummoned or die, they will heal all your other minions. It's very effective to sustain the build. The small cluster here is the most important one. We're going to look for Enduring Composure, which you can alteration craft. So the Enduring Composure, what it does is it gives you 1 endurance charge every second. If you've been hit recently, that makes you get you 4 endurance charges. So as long as you're getting hit once every, I believe it's 5 or 8 seconds, you're going to maintain 4 endurance charges, and we get 4 by this little node over here, which will help you mitigate a lot of damage taken consistently. So it's a very, very strong small cluster that you'll probably see in a lot of builds moving forward in this league. So I don't want to talk too much about this approach with the build. Again, the DPS will change once we know the Spectres. It's probably going to do a lot more, but this is how the medium budget works as we're transitioning into a bit more bulky defensive approach where we're not relying on a guard skill or having temporarily set buffs. This is how this build is tanking. Now, this is to my sweet build. I'm just going to leave the PoB in the build, of course. We are going to go for a high budget CI approach. This will be my starter build. We're doing 62.5 million Shaper DPS in a high budget version, and that is with a very, very, very bad high budget helmet. Again, this will very likely be an ES version. And all of these bases, like even Val Regalia, there will be a better ES version available, but we don't know how that's going to look. We saw a video where there was a chest that had like 50% higher base energy shield than a Val Regalia, so we'll see what we can actually land on. I'm expecting this build to be around 6.5, maybe 7,000 energy shield, which will be much, much tankier than this. But obviously, this is a very pricey build. You can change the Aegis Aurora for a rare shield to get another 20 million Shaper DPS. You can change your, but you'll be squishier, of course. Obviously, a better helmet, you can add another 6 to 10 million for just the crit mod, another 6 to 10 million with the Essence of Horror. You can add another 20-something with a mirror helmet. It's just absolutely nuts. And this is without utilizing the Vol Summon Skeletons. If you click this button, you're doing 79 million. It's absolutely nutty, but I've been focusing a lot of efforts on the defensive layers with this build and focusing that. However, the offering is actually changed from Flesh to Spirit since we're now scaling crit. A very important little note. Configuration, again, we're killing all the bandits in this version of the build. It's a level 100, it's crazy high, and it's really, really cool. And I'm very excited to play this. We're back on Instant Leech, and the way the Leech will work is by going Energy Shield. We need to make Ghost Reaver turn that Leech into Energy Shield Leech, which will then scale with these 3 nodes, and 10% of that will be instant. And obviously running meta clusters, one with all attributes and one with all resistance. Again, still using Enduring Composure. Very likely that we'll do more damage with this. However, pretty crucial part with this version is that we will be using a Thread of Hope with a with a large ring to reach the glancing blows. Otherwise, we're going to waste points. And that's basically the gist of this build. I'll be playtesting this live on stream come launch. And again, I don't want to waste too much of your time. All the details in the written guide. Do check it out. And I hope you guys enjoy this little showcase of my League starter. Very excited to go back to CI. If you did find yourself enjoying this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content, And I hope I didn't speak too fast, but till next time, stay safe.